Hoy hoy everybody, and welcome to a very special Talking Simpsons presentation. I am one of your hosts, the Spider Pig hater, Bob Mackey, the Spider Pig scoundrel, if you will.
And hey, it's Henry Gilbert. I do the least offensive throat singing anyone could do.
So this is an unusual thing for us, but it's a very fun thing in that we are presenting someone else's podcast, but thankfully we happen to be on it.
Yes, yeah, the awesome podcast, Michael and Us, me and Bob are big fans of it. Support them on Patreon even. We have had both of the hosts, Luke Savage and Will Sloan, on our podcast before, and they wanted to cover the Simpsons movie for their podcast and invited us on, and we were more than happy to do it, and it was super fun to record with them. Actually, just last night at the time of this recording.
Yes, it was a very quick turnaround, and so their podcast essentially, well, you'll hear what it is in the episode itself, but essentially they are a leftist look at certain kinds of movies, often, good and bad documentaries, but often they'll do things like watch the original British Office and give a leftist critique of that. Yeah. Actually, there aren't a lot of politics on this episode.
Not as much as I thought there would be.
Yeah. So if you think that would be a turnoff to you, I say give it a chance, and I think you'll really like it. They are very, very smart guys, and they have some great commentaries that we often don't hit sometimes. So
it was a ton of fun to talk, and also just to be complimented by them. Yes. I really appreciated that.
It's a real ass-kissing festival on this podcast.
But yes, so you could listen to this on their feed, and I would definitely say check out in previous episodes as well. But we wanted to upload this to our feed so you guys could check out this crossover episode of sorts of Talking Simpsons meets Michael and Us.
Yes, so please listen and enjoy this little bonus.
20th Century Fox presents Homer.
More, please.
Marge, Lisa, Bart, Maggie, Mr. Burns, Smithers, Krusty, Barney, Lenny, Carl, Itchy, Moe. What? Grandpa, Apu, Wiggum, Milhouse, Nelson, Ralph, Selma, Patty, Bumblebee Man, Willie, Jimbo, Skinner, Otto, Rockman, Reverend Lovejoy.
Here's the money shot.
And a cast of thousands in the movie event 18 years in the making.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, or I should say ahoy hoy. Luke Savage here. With me, as always, my esteemed co-host, Will Sloan.
Hello.
And we are joined in a special crossover episode by Henry and Bob from the Talking Simpsons podcast. Hey, guys, how's it going?
Hey, it's me, Henry. Ipa to everyone out there.
Hey, it's me, Bob, the other guy on Talking Simpsons.
So this is something we've been wanting to do for a while. The Simpsons movie is definitely something that's been on, Will and my radar for a long time. It's the perfect foil for both our shows. For those that don't know, Talking Simpsons, it's a great effort of Simpsons scholarship, the greatest one out there. Bob and Henry are two of the greatest living scholars of the greatest show of all time.
Thank you.
So they know The Simpsons. And as for The Simpsons movie, which is our main topic of discussion today, it's perfect because it came out in 2007, which is ancient history in 2020 terms, and yet is strangely kind of late period for The Simpsons, at least if you're, grew up watching The Simpsons kind of in the 90s. So it's weirdly like late period and also backward looking. We're looking both backwards and forwards in strange ways today. But before we get into the movie, I wanted to kind of just explain what our show is to listeners of the Talking Simpsons podcast and to have you guys do the same. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast and kind of what you guys do?
Sure. Well, it's called Talking Simpsons, and for about 5 years now, we've been going chronologically through The Simpsons, and we go super, super in-depth into each episode. We really, we focus on guests. We have guests on every show, and what we do is we go through every episode scene by scene. We play clips from the show, and if there's a reference, we dig deep into what it is, and often play a clip of what the reference is referencing, and we are really a clip-based show with guests offering their input, and often episodes will go up to close to 3 hours long because we are definitive. We know we only have one chance to get it right, so we really dig down into every reference and joke and quote.
Yeah, pretty recently we wrapped up season 10. We decided to revisit season 1 because the first time we did it was a bit shorter, and so now we're really giving it the proper due for season 1. But we'll soon be back to season 11 again and talking about Mel Gibson's wonderful episode of The Simpsons
and the death of Maud Flanders.
Politically, me and Bob are pretty lefty Bay Area dudes. episodes. And so, our show isn't a political podcast, but definitely we rant enough politically from time to time. And we've had on you guys, had on folks from the awesome lefty podcast, Chapo Trap House, and also the Struggle Session. I'm a big fan of that one. Politics enters the show from time to time. It is quite a concept, politics. So yeah, we have a separate podcast called What a Cartoon, where we do similar for different animated series once a week as well. But yep, that's our whole deal.
Whenever I was a kid and a season 1 episode of The Simpsons came on, I was always so disappointed. How has been revisiting?
We do get entertainment out of it, but it's more of like an intellectual exercise for us to be like looking at it through the prism of history. Like, what does this say about 1990, the state of TV, the state of the world? Mm-hmm. But there are often funny jokes, brilliant pieces of animation, but it's just funny to see where everything began.
Yeah, and watching them figure it out as they go. It's so it's been fun in that way. But yes, no, when I was a kid, if it had come on in syndication, be like, season 1, man, I'm putting in my tape of season 5 or whatever and just watch that.
Which is wild because Simpsons Mania was about season 1. People had never seen anything like it, Yeah. People were so used to the Huxtables, and then all of a sudden came wild little Bart Simpson.
It's hard to not just say The Cosby Show when we mean a mainstream sitcom, whenever we're just like, oh, The Simpsons, we're doing this, when The Cosby Show is doing that, and then we all just get sad the second we say it, just like, we got to just start saying Full House or something else.
Yeah.
It's just a bummer.
But it was engineered to take down The Cosby Show because that's why it moved to Thursdays, just to be Cosby, and it did once. It beat a rerun of The Cosby Show.
Of the last season.
Yeah.
So right here, this is the kind of, that is like the high level trivia about The Simpsons that Will and I do not know. So I'm glad that we put this to you guys. I did want to.
I knew that.
I did not know that. I'm obviously the ignorant one here, but before we're all fully sucked into the vortex of the Simpsons movie, I wanted to kind of explain what our show is to your listeners who may not have heard of it. Basically, around 2016, Will and I decided we wanted to do what I think at the time it's safe to say was a quasi-ironic dive into Michael Moore's oeuvre. Will and I think like a lot of people of our generation, grew up watching Michael Moore. He kind of helped politicize us. We thought it would be interesting to revisit his films through the prism of the events that were going on in 2016 and kind of see how they held up. And we found that some of them did or kind of did, and some of them really didn't. After we got through Michael Moore's oeuvre, we dove into the kind of wider universe of sort of Michael Moore themed paraphernalia, kind of conservative kitsch documentaries that were critical of him, but nevertheless aped his style. And when we ran through that, which of course, was not inexhaustible, got into just, a kind of wider podcast universe that we've been building ever since that includes everything from, Ingmar Bergman and Sergei Eisenstein to evangelical documentaries about how the libs are stealing Christmas. So, it's there's some for everyone. And so that's pretty much it. If you're a Michael and Us listener, we highly recommend you check out Talking Simpsons. If you're a Talking Simpsons listener, we humbly ask that you check out our podcast and maybe even subscribe to our Patreon.
We recommend it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Well, let's get into it. It's hard to know where to start with the Simpsons movie, but I guess since you guys are the scholars here, it might be useful to just have some basic context for what the Simpsons movie, was, how it was conceived, and then we can all kind of do a go around and kind of see what our general takes are of it.
Well, I think it's important to point out that this was always sort of floating around The Simpsons, the idea of a movie. And Camp Krusty, the Simpsons episode, that was almost the movie. Like, when that was in production, James L. Brooks called Gracie Films and was like, this should be the movie. But that episode was barely long enough to be an episode. So they were like, okay, we can't do this right now. But it was only until like the early 2000s when it was starting to become more possible. But they could never shut down production of the TV show to make the movie. So this was being produced at the same time as like season 18 of the show.
Yeah, I think the proper ramp up for it came around when they started doing the commentaries for the DVDs, because it was an excuse to get many of the older producers and writers for the show back into the studio like almost on a daily basis. And so that's when more and more conversations were happening, and they got back almost every showrunner of the show and lead writer back to write a script and just workshop it. And yeah, it was all happening during the prime time of, the Michael and Us era of the Bush administration and the 2004 election, like right up to mid 07. Well, and yeah, they'd been working on it for the longest of times while still producing the show. And they finally, like Fox Studios, started advertising it in 06. I'd heard for many years, like Groening, he'd do some interview somewhere, Matt Groening would, and he'd say, the movie's coming, we're working on the movie. I'm like, yeah, right. They'd even drop something like, we talked with Aaron Brockovich about doing a part in this, which totally got cut from the movie.
That's right, yeah.
but then they did the first trailer in like summer of 06, because it was a parody of the Superman Returns trailer. Remember that?
Oh, that's right. And then
I remember this.
In 2007, leaping his way onto the silver screen, the greatest hero in American history.
I forgot what I was supposed to say.
The Simpsons movie.
the season 10 DVDs, the framing device for that is like the movie studio, and there was a little like sneak preview of the movie within that DVD set.
Before we get into the plot of this movie, which is I think fairly perfunctory, we don't need to spend too much time on it. I thought we could do a little go around, and I want to hear everyone's takes on the movie. We've all just kind of watched it in the last few hours. I had not seen it since maybe 2007 or 2008. For people listening, we haven't kind of gamed this out. Maybe we'll agree, maybe we'll disagree. I think if we disagree in some places about what we like, what we don't like, that'll be interesting. So I don't know, Will, do you want to start us off with kind of what was your take revisiting this one?
I found it disappointing in 2007. I remember it was enjoyable to hear Harry Shearer's voice in surround sound and to see my favorite characters, up there on that big screen. But I remember at the time feeling it compared unfavorably to something like the South Park movie, which really takes advantage of the possibilities of the medium. It felt like an extended episode, and watching it again, I am still disappointed by it. Fundamentally, something better could have been done with this plot of Springfield's getting trapped in a dome. I feel like we don't spend enough time in the dome. Instead, we go to Alaska with the Simpsons.
Yeah.
And I feel like the conceit of the Simpsons going to Alaska doesn't bring a lot to the movie, and the movie really spins its wheels. And I think the movie is constantly gesturing towards political satire and not really going there.
I guess I agree with much of that, but what was it like for you guys revisiting this, particularly as two people who are so immersed in the Simpsons universe on a daily basis?
Oh, well, I was still watching the show at that point, and I was watching it up until I think 2009. And I was also writing a column for my my grad school paper, the Kent State Stater, and I wrote a furious review of this movie. I was so mad about it when I saw it, and I will tell you guys out there, I spent my entire 20s just being mad about The Simpsons.
Is that review? Do you still have that?
If you look it up, I'm sure it's still online somewhere. Like if you type in Bob Mackey Simpsons movie Kent State Stater, I'm sure you'll find it. I'm sure it's embarrassing.
Oh, let's find it and let's put it in the show notes.
Please do. I'm not too ashamed of it. But yeah, I watched it today. And I found it watchable, but whenever I see this movie now, I just think of all the missed opportunities, because this was their one shot to make a Simpsons movie, and I just see a complete lack of confidence. Mm-hmm. And this could have been like every Simpsons fan dream come true. Instead of having like the dream of like, what if like Mr. Burns and Sideshow Bob teamed up, the two ultimate villains in the universe? It's like, no, here's some new guy that isn't Hank Scorpio. Yeah. That's what drives me insane. All of these weird choices that just show a lack of confidence. And then a year later, when I rented the DVD and listened to the commentary, it was all like laid clear to me. Al Jean is on that commentary saying, here are the jokes that didn't work with test audiences. Here are the ones that did. Test audiences love Spider-Pig, so we put the Spider-Pig in song as much as we could. So this was just a movie that was focus grouped to death on a show that famously did not have to accept notes from the network. Yeah. And that drove me nuts.
I enjoyed it in 2007. I revisited it for the 10th anniversary, like 2.5 years ago. So it was relatively fresh for me. My feeling in 2007 was I thought it would be as bad as the worst episodes of the show were at the time. And so it being better than that, I liked that. And I think now I give it feels like a 6 out of 10 to me, maybe a 5 out of 10, honestly. But there are bits where me and Bob watched it together right before this, and I kept going like, well, that's a good joke. That's a good joke. Like, I think there's enough times where I go like, that's a good joke that I don't feel it's a completely wasted time watching it. And I also think there have been way lower lows in the 13 years of Simpsons episodes after this one. So maybe that's like changed my views on what's good or bad about the movie. But yeah, I'm totally with Bob. So many missed opportunities that I think they were really scared of their own like references in a way. And instead they're like, no, let's reference just Titanic and Arnold Schwarzenegger and just everything that people all know. It is the most famous stuff.
So I think it's an interesting place to start off. I mean, I feel like we have a mostly a consensus here. You know, there's a few things I want to talk about, but I do think we should kind of lay out the plot of the movie for those who haven't seen it. Does anyone want to take on that somewhat workmanlike task?
I can maybe do it. The Simpsons movie opens when Springfield is in the midst of an environmental catastrophe. The Springfield Lake, is it? Springfield has a lake, by the way. The Springfield Lake has it's on the border of being irredeemably polluted. Poor little Lisa is trying to raise environmental awareness of the townsfolk, but is meeting with only resistance, except from her love interest.
Her muse,
the wonderful character of Colin, who really caught on.
Colin Mania, does anyone remember?
He was right up there with Spider Pig, is the most popular.
I have a fading Colin t-shirt in my closet.
Don't we all?
Meanwhile, Homer becomes the proud papa of a new pet pig. And
the aforementioned Spider Pig, in fact.
He fills an entire silo full of the pig's droppings. And he's going to humanely and environmentally friendly get rid of the pig droppings, but instead he decides to dump it all in the lake. And this seems to be the tipping point that makes Springfield irredeemably polluted. And so the Environmental Protection Agency becomes aware of this.
Big government comes in to intervene.
The head of the EPA, voiced by Albert Brooks, consults with the president, who is Arnold Schwarzenegger, and comes up with a plan to contain Springfield inside a gigantic dome, kind of like the Dark Knight Rises plot.
Very similar.
Just drop a big dome over Springfield and try to erase all knowledge of the town. Homer, who has caused this problem, and his family managed to escape through circumstances too contrived to get into here and try to start a new life in Alaska. Meanwhile, civil society collapses in Springfield, and Albert Brooks decides that what really needs to be done is to drop a bomb in Springfield and end it once and for all. And Homer is able to get a shot at redemption by coming back and saving the town. Those are the broad strokes of the plot.
I mean, as a big budget movie idea, it lets them have a giant action set piece at the end and travel places. Like it checks the boxes of what you expect from a big film adaptation of something. Same with like how in the X-Files movie, which I was a giant X-Files fan, just like in Simpsons, 30 minutes into the film, they're just like, well, let's just blow up that premise, get them away from each other, go somewhere else. We got to move away from the premise that you enjoy about this.
And even though this is a feature film and feature films typically expand the universe, this movie is rigorously focused, I would say, on Homer and Bart.
Oh, yeah.
With a little bit of Lisa. You know, a cast of dozens, hundreds even, each get a little 10-second bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get these weird assemblages like towards the end of the movie where in the sort of bombed out, anarchic Springfield where society's collapsed, like you see, it's Lenny and Carl they've just teamed up with Dr. Hibbert. And Cletus, they're just together for no reason, which is like, strikes me as very arbitrary assemblage of characters. Or then there's another scene where a sort of committee of concerned citizens goes to Mr. Burns, who's the only one that still has electricity, and it's like Apu, and then who's the other one?
Right,
Chief
it's
Wiggum?
Dr. Hibbert,
Right.
Apu, and Chief Wiggum.
Yeah.
And I love that Apu is one of them. Like this random convenience store owner is part of the summit to Springfield's wealthiest citizens.
And that just seems like the kind of choice where it's just so that they can get all those characters on screen.
Check them off. Yeah.
I like the depiction of class harmony in Springfield because, from the Green Day concert at the beginning where we see Krusty the Clown, who is one of Springfield's most famous citizens, he's just rocking out in the crowd with anyone. We see Mr. Burns and Smithers at church, just in the back row.
Yeah.
That's very random. Yeah.
I will say up front, if we are still up front, that I don't know if you guys agree with me, but to me personally, the Simpsons movie is Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1 and 2. That is the ultimate celebration of all the characters with the best Burns moments. Like, he is the villain of the series, and his plot is very similar to Cargill's, basically destroying the entire town. So that is what I'm measuring the movie against. If that's unfair, I'm sorry, but that to me will always be the Simpsons movie.
I've never thought of that, but I actually really like that. Let's officially, both our podcasts officially endorse the idea that Who Shot Mr. Burns 1 and 2 is the official Simpsons movie.
I suppose the reason that we're covering the movie as opposed to a regular episode of the show on this podcast is because the Simpsons movie has some mid-2000s politics in it.
Way more than I remembered. I rewatching it from the political viewpoint, I was like, oh, I guess that is kind of a joke about Iraq or whatever.
Yeah.
Before getting into that, I'm curious from you guys, to what extent did The Simpsons, if at all, contribute to your politics?
Oh, I mean, for me, it definitely, influenced it as a kid of just knowing that Republicans are bad or whatever. It at least taught me that to an extent. I mean, The Simpsons also talk shit about Democrats just as much.
And unions. Yeah.
And unions. Oh man, does it hate unions and union labor? But I think it gave me, at least a bit of a political, the crunchy, softy, Portlandy liberalness of grading. It taught me that. Sadly, my political journey is a reason I listen to your show is because Michael Moore was a big part of my political awakening. I watched Politically Incorrect because Bill Maher was definitely very smart to me in 1996, and and then Michael Moore was on that, so I kind of followed it to there. And when Michael Moore was on The Simpsons, I was excited for that too. But yeah,
I saw that when it aired, yes.
But yes, The Simpsons definitely pointed me in a direction for sure. And the more politically aware I got into the late 90s, I could recognize the stuff I liked politically in The Simpsons.
Yeah, for me, it was more so this is Matt Groening's goal, is to brainwash the children of America to have disrespect for every authority figure, and I certainly did. But I think it was a very have it both ways kind of attempt, in that The Simpsons says, every authority figure is full of shit, but also they're helpless, and they are pitiable, like Principal Skinner. So that is really what it informed me of.
Yeah, I would say that in my own political upbringing, so to speak, The Simpsons occupied a similar place that Mad Magazine occupied, where it, as a child, gives you permission to laugh at authority and laugh at grown-ups and their institutions, whether it's the school or the church or big business. I wouldn't say it really went beyond that for me, but just as Mad Magazine, I don't think really has a coherent set of politics aside from disrespecting authority. But I think it's a good entry point for a kid.
I think the sensibility of a show can be useful and can have kind of political content, even if it's not kind of, as it were, didactic political content. And the show definitely had, the sensibility that all you just described. It was present for me as well. I grew up in rural Ontario, and there were a lot of kids I knew that weren't actually allowed to watch The Simpsons. And, the reasons they would cite is they would say things like, well, my mom and dad say that it showcases bad family values, which of course just made me like it more. And I do think that is a vindication of what the creators of the show were trying to do. In this age of very wholesome, kind of moralistic family sitcoms, they were kind of trying to intervene in that and present something that was, I don't know, much more ironic and a bit more transgressive. And of course, there's a famous moment that I'm sure you guys have talked about where George H.W. Bush, condemned The Simpsons in that speech, prompting.
We need more families like the Waltons.
Yeah, right.
Simpsons.
Prompting, Marge Simpson, of course, to pen a letter to Mrs. Bush.
We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
Yeah, they'd engage more with H.W. Bush than W. Bush. When this movie came out, they never had like W on the show, which was, politically bugging me at the time because I was all about like make fun of George W. Bush like Bill Maher does all the time.
I had a dartboard with George Bush on at the time.
I did want to mention that, Henry. That's a really good point because this is on the record. I don't want to pick too much on Al Jean because he was like the overlord of this movie and work in the showrunner of the show at this time and still is. And on a commentary, he basically said like, we didn't mention George W. Bush or make jokes about him because his popularity was up, but it was down. We just didn't know if people liked him or not. Like, number one, that's not a good reason to not make a joke. Mm-hmm. But also, it is very toothless, which is why, like, now they make all the small hands Orange Man jokes and those terrible shorts. But when they could not do that back in the early 2000s, and they wouldn't. I think it was a top-down mandate, like, guys, no George W. Bush jokes. I think Homer made one joke, like, this is what happens in Dick Cheney's America back in that era, but that was it, and that was shocking. Like, they mentioned reality. Oh my god!
Another interesting fact about The Simpsons is that one of the key writers, one of the acknowledged geniuses of the show, is John Swartzwelder, who was pretty vociferously conservative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, he's of a right libertarian bent for sure. But sometimes those stories I hear about him, I think he is an odd duck to be sure. But I also think he was just kind of like iconoclastically just trollishly trying to get on the nerves of all the liberal writers he was surrounded by. He would say things very negative about Clinton when they're just all like, Clinton's the best. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and he left the show early in Bush's first term, too, in that era.
Yeah. So, but I think spiritually, his type of hatred of all government definitely is inside the Springfield for sure.
Something else I realize, a way that The Simpsons, I guess, has informed my worldview is, because it loomed so large in my childhood, it almost set a default of what America and what Americana looked like. It's like the nuclear family as depicted on The Simpsons almost became my default. That's an American middle class, lower middle class nuclear family. And of course they have a 2-story house and a single parent income.
I often forget how much it exports like Americana or a view of it. And once we started doing the podcast, we started hearing way more from like, Canadian or British or even like South American fans of The Simpsons who have just a totally different viewpoint on it, on how it has a view of America, which it's funny. The opposite for me with Canada was I learned it all from the Red Green Show on PBS. That's what
beautiful.
Oh man, we're going to have to do an episode on, if you haven't seen the Red Green film, is it Duct Tape Forever?
I think Duct Tape Forever was a strictly local phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, Red Green, although we've never, I don't think, done an episode on him on Michael and Us, is very much in our thoughts, much of the time. But to get back to the movie, I think that one of the key questions about how you're going to receive this movie comes down to what extent do you think The Simpsons making a transition from a show and, kind of the production values of a regular episode and the regular, the length of a regular episode into a movie, how well does that work? And there are a few things tied up in that. One is, the plot, like is the plot enough to sustain a movie? But I think more deeply, there's the issue of, in the movie, you get a lot of these kind of visual idioms, gags and things like that are clear references to the show, to the library of visual idioms that you'll recognize if you're a regular viewer of The Simpsons. And I found when Will and I were watching the movie, I think I received some of these a little bit differently than he did, because I found a lot of them pretty derivative. For example, there's that, actually kind of funny gag of Bart riding the skateboard naked, and then all these things happen to kind of conceal his bits, and then you actually do see his bits somewhat surprisingly at the end. I mean, the part where the skateboard kind of swoops around the corner is quite literally taken from the intro, the classic intro of the show. And so my reaction watching things like this, and there were innumerable other examples, is that, it felt derivative to me. But Will made the good point, I think, that, when you're adapting things to a movie, actually, this is sort of part of what the point is, and it's part of how you do that. And if, I'd have been a kid watching this, I mean, I guess I wasn't quite a kid in 2007, but I mean, if this movie had somehow come out 7 years earlier and I'd been in a theater and I'd seen these production values and I'd have seen the characters I love with surround sound, and I would have been like, oh, this is so cool. And maybe that's what it's doing.
It's a lot of fan service, and I think their problem was not enough fan service.
I totally agree with you. Yeah,
but getting, say, the gorge back and showing them just redoing the Homer jumping off the gorge thing, but with Bart and Homer on a motorcycle. That's one of those like shout outs to the fan service that I think does pay off in a more like big screen sense. And watching it in, I guess, dude, the specialness isn't really there as much as it was in 07 of like, this is HD widescreen Simpsons. And when I'm seeing it on my Disney Plus app on a television, like it's as widescreen as HD as the show is now, though obviously you can tell they spent more money on one than the other.
I think one of the problems is that it doesn't really expand the universe, or doesn't add to our understanding of what The Simpsons is. I think it maybe could have done that if it, as I said earlier, spent more time in the dome and been like, well, what does Springfield actually look like when society collapses? You mentioned why Who Shot Mr. Burns would have been an interesting movie, because it sort of takes Mr. Burns' villainy to its logical conclusion and imagines how would the city and how would the characters in the city react to Mr. Burns doing this. Whereas this movie, not only don't you get to see society crumble, but it's instigated by this character, Cargill, the Albert Brooks character, who we'll never see again.
And who they have to like very forcedly put in a scene with Homer at the very end, just so like, this isn't satisfying unless they directly defeat him.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Burns, or Who Shot Mr. Burns, as a movie, as I view it, is more satisfying because this movie is basically just Homer, the Homer movie, but that movie is about the town. And I like how we at least get like little flashes of the town during the Alaska stuff, but like you guys were saying, I wish this was a story about the town. I hate that they leave it. I don't like the Alaska stuff. I wish they could have just done so much fun stuff in Springfield. I don't know what the plot could be or would be in that scenario, but I think that's a huge missed opportunity to not do more with Springfield, the location that we love.
Yeah.
And what was the Alaska stuff? It was just another story where Homer almost loses Marge and has to win her back.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because this is something I wanted to get into. I mean, the point I just made about how the show makes all these it draws all these visual reference points, and to me that felt sort of derivative. I think there's also something similar going on in terms of the plot lines and the narrative. And you guys will have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but it strikes me that, things like Lisa meeting a socially conscious boy or a socially conscious kid her own age and being kind of smitten, or Bart, deciding, well, actually, maybe Flanders would be a good dad, that sort of thing. I mean, maybe those plots haven't exactly been mirrored in the show, but to me, those felt like echoes of, narrative arcs that we'd kind of already seen before.
Yeah, I really feel like Lisa was wasted in this movie because it's a movie about an environmental topic, and she is sort of sidelined with a very boring love interest. And her story is, I guess Lisa falls in love with someone you never see again. And technically, Bart was the son of Flanders in the foster home episode, but it was shown that he does not like that family or his vibe. This is a different version of that story where Flanders is a good dad for Bart, but I guess Flanders might have changed his fathering techniques without Maude.
Yeah. I mean, stories of Bart gets a better dad than Homer and then goes back to Homer. Lisa gets a new crush, and then, in this case, they actually just stay together at the end, which is not reflected in the show at all. But still, Lisa gets a new crush. Homer messes up with Marge, and then they have to get back together. Like, these are just tried and true plot points they've done more than once, and in some cases more than 4 times by 2007. And I think it was them like counting on what they could do, that they knew they could do it, but none of it felt they, especially with the Homer and Marge thing, they tried to make it feel like, okay, yes, we know you've seen Homer and Marge break up before, but we really mean it this time. They're trying to say they step it up for a movie with moments like that, but it never rang true enough for me, especially. And that one was the one they tried the most on and got closest. But even then, it's like, this doesn't step it up from a show plot to a movie plot.
So I'm not quite sure where this fits in, but there was something particular that bugged me just in a very pet peevey way. And I'm hoping maybe we can tease this out. But the decision to have Arnold Schwarzenegger be the president, but he's clearly just Rainier Wolfcastle, right? Yeah. He's McBain. And there's something about that. I can't quite put my finger on why it bothers me, but I guess to take a stab at it, The Simpsons was at its best when it was dealing in these archetypes, as opposed to specific characters. I mean, or like specific characters drawn from the real world. The Simpsons characters were so strong because they were these aggregations of different archetypes that captured something very real about like different kinds of people, different kinds of social roles, or, membership in a particular social class or whatever. There's the Reverend character. There's the evangelical Christian neighbor and his extremely like too perfect and weirdly prudish family. There's the principal who is ostensibly like this figure of authority, but is actually this like wimpy mama's boy who has, who's like not really a full adult, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's something about the decision to take this character, Rainier Wolfcastle, who is, I guess, he's clearly an Arnold derivative character, but, he's also just more broadly about a particular kind of action star who stars in these like hideously violent, extremely sexist movies that nevertheless do really well because people actually want to see them. And so the decision to just sort of almost peel off the mask and say, oh no, he's just Arnold now, bugged me. What do you guys make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was
Me and Bob could go on all day about this,
all of
honestly.
the fury that I felt in 2007 was because of those surrogates for characters we knew. And again, going back to those the DVD commentary, they were up front saying, yeah, people wouldn't know who Rainier Wolfcastle was. People wouldn't know who Hank Scorpio was.
Unbelievable.
So,
How dare they disrespect The Simpsons like that?
But I also feel like, does it matter if you're presented with new character A or new character B if you don't know who either one of them are? Like, if you've never seen The Simpsons before, you won't know who Hank Scorpio is or who Russ Cargill is. So why does it matter at all?
Yeah. Either way, I mean, but Schwarzenegger especially, like, he really sums up just the worst choices the film makes because we've done a bunch of interviews with folks who worked on The Simpsons. One of them was with Mike Scully, a former showrunner, super nice guy, and he told us about working. We asked him a couple questions about the movie, and we asked him like, why wasn't that Rainier Wolfcastle? And I'm not quoting verbatim, but he kind of brought up that like it was in some drafts and then they changed it, and we're like, why? And he's like, I don't remember, which maybe he didn't remember, or maybe he was covering for the fact that it was just somebody else's pick. But
it just feels like it's a lack of confidence that is just put on screen as a character. Like, we didn't think you'd get this, so here's this guy instead.
Without the remove of it, and not even, I mean, what really bugs me with Schwarzenegger as a choice about not trusting the audience with something is that he has to, on his desk, have a big nameplate that says President Schwarzenegger. I'm just like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, it's like, not only do they not like think that people will know who Rainier Wolfcastle is, they don't even trust the audience to get the reference that it's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
And
they
also
have to like scream it out loud.
It's also like a weird disconnect because in the Simpsons world, our president is their president. He was never president in the show before this.
Not once.
It's such a weird idea.
He's sort of both Arnold Schwarzenegger, who at the time it was this popular thing to say, oh, democracy has reached its nadir when California is voting for an action star. He's that, but he's also George W. Bush in this movie, isn't he?
Yeah, when they roll out the plans and say, like, pick one, they are so casting him as what I definitely feel like the Simpsons liberal writers' vision of Bush was, which is just like, he's a dumb guy controlled by evil people around him. And
but a likable, charismatic, dumb guy that's being misled, ultimately.
Yeah.
No, I need to know what I'm approving.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, knowing things is overrated. Anyone can pick something when they know what it is. It takes real leadership to pick something you're clueless about.
Okay, I picked 3.
Try again.
1.
Go higher.
5.
Too high.
3.
You already said 3.
6.
There is no 6.
2.
Double it?
4.
As you wish, sir.
Well, I mean, the character Russ Cargill, too, on the DVDs, they've got extras that show the original version of him they had with Albert Brooks doing a completely different voice and character. And he just is Donald Rumsfeld. Like I said, do a Donald Rumsfeld voice. And I think they rightly gave him a higher energy voice in their second take on him. But like they animated a scene with him as much more of a direct Rumsfeld reference, too.
While we're talking about the politics of the film, do you have any insight as to why they went with the environmental angle? And in particular, the movie references An Inconvenient Truth a couple of times. Why that?
Well, I mean, for one thing, Mac Rating is a Gore buddy. Like Al Gore was on Futurama multiple times. Like Al Gore's daughter wrote for Futurama.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So I could see, it's just a shout out to his political buddy and wanting to push up his agenda. And I mean, the environmental angle on it's not bad, and it's definitely from a at least a left of center vision of it. But I think that's an easier place for them to take it than going to the war on terror, even though they kind of deal with it. But maybe they saw my thinking is maybe they saw the EPA as an easier department to address than having to deal with, the NSA or whatever.
I like that the EPA is depicted as this incredibly evil, conniving, and secretive organization that's all powerful.
Yeah, it's
watching it again. I was struck that I remembered that there was an environmental arc, but I'm not really sure what the message is, and I wish it had either leaned into just sort of burlesque satire or didactic. I probably wouldn't have liked it if it had really tried to have a heavy-handed message, but at least then there would have been some kind of coherent purpose for the environmental angle, which doesn't seem to me to be there.
Yeah, and Russ Cargill, it's a fun performance by Albert Brooks, but he's sort of a boring character because there's no ulterior motive, there's no coup or anything like that he's trying to pull. It's just no, he just gone crazy and he just wants to do whatever he wants to do to Springfield.
Well, his stated goal of why the world's richest man start to work from here to give back, and that feels much more like an Obama era statement than a Bush era statement, really. But yeah, I think the EPA stuff, they just dropped the environmentalism at minute 30 because they should have had a thing where Lisa says, now let's get back to cleaning things up, or the EPA's gone too far, but there's good ways that citizens could clean up the thing. But instead they seem to be saying that just if you try to clean things up and then fail, the government will destroy you rather than help you clean things up.
It's a little South Parky, actually.
For sure, yeah.
South Park at its worst I once heard the politics of it referred to as libertarian passive. And the definition that was given to that was, it's a show where the do-gooders are always the problem. So in this case, the do-gooders, one of them is the EPA, but then when we see the EPA trying to protect the environment, they're just Big Brother oppressing ordinary citizens. You know what I mean? They're actually, to bring it back to Al Gore, the definitive South Park episode along those lines is the unfunny Man Bear Pig episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which they apologized for last year, but I wasn't listening. I was like, well, hey, good on you now.
A little too late, in my opinion.
So something else that I think is really funny to discuss is, which is what more widely applicable beyond this movie in the Simpsons universe. And I think gets to, I don't know, I hate to put it this way, but core metaphysical questions about the Simpsons and what Springfield is, and I'm referring, of course, to the fact that the geography of Springfield changes so much. And maybe this is nitpicking, but I actually really like it when they do that on the show. And in the movie, I didn't particularly like it. So, in the movie, we see, for example, Moe's Tavern is next to the church, which I don't think we'd ever seen before. You guys can confirm that for me.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah,
no way. Mr. Burns, it turns out, not only does he have a mansion, but his mansion is kind of on this great acropolis, towering over the city. I don't think we've ever seen that before.
No,
Springfield has a giant lake which I don't think was present before. And in the show, this is a device that's used frequently. And I think kind of mirrors the device of, the episodes aren't always contiguous with one another in terms of character. Like Mr. Burns, hilariously doesn't remember that he's had interactions with his family before and things like that. In the show, there's, funny things like, I can't remember which episode it is, but where, Homer has to drive through traffic to work to get to the nuclear plant. And then he finally pulls into the lot, and it turns out that, he's just parking on the other side of the fence outside the Simpsons yard. And that's funny to me. But in the movie, I did not like it, and I actually don't have an explanation for that.
It is weird. I don't like to get too hung up on it, but I do feel like things are moved for the sake of convenience, and as a writer, I understand why. But also, I'm more of a fan when they change. They play with the idea of locations changing, and they really hang a lantern on it. Like there's a joke in the show in a later season where Marge, every time she looks out the kitchen window, there's a new landmark outside. There's the nuclear plant, there's the prison, and just we move buildings around so they can be where they need to be. But often, if it's just for the sake of convenience, I'm just I wish the Moe's bar was not next to the church. It works for a gag, but then you're thinking well, it's never been there, so it's kind of distracting.
Well, and for a film where they want you to build real stakes of but the town could be destroyed, and here's the town, or they even zoom out so far that you see a dome drop on top of it to show you this is what the entirety of Springfield is. That then when they play around with it more, at least in the world of the film, it does kind of damage at least the reality of the stakes they want you to feel of no, you should be really worried about this ticking clock. Look at it. The city of Springfield, it's really in trouble. Marge really means it this time when they're going to break up. But I guess in a larger sense, the show, when they fuck around too much with the shared reality or history of it, that was a thing that led me to feel well, if you're going to change that history, then you change the next history. So why did I get so invested in this history that you don't care about? It's a danger of telling your audience not to care. That The Simpsons, sometimes they do it to funny effect, but other times they push that envelope a little too far and punish you for caring too much.
So I guess we've been pretty hard on the movie, and I do think it's worth maybe going around and, saying, is there a joke or a gag or just an effort that was made in the movie, something that we like about it. I'm going to save mine for last because it's extremely random. But Will, what was there something you liked?
Well, there are many gags that I liked. I liked spending time with my good friend Homer. Off the top of my head, one gag that I liked was that bit at near the end where he dresses up as now I'm going to try to pathetically recite a comedy routine from a movie, but
this is why they put clips on there.
What's the bit where he's dressed up as a brigadier or something?
Oh yeah, where he's outside of the dome and there's a soldier patrolling and he goes up and he just has this costume out of nowhere, and then he tries to use it to bluff his way past the guard, and then he ends up just punching the guard.
And then he checks his checklist, and number 5 is return guard's uniform by 5.
Him pulling out the second leaf that he had been making notes on, that was a good one. I think there are a good handful of funny jokes in there. I'll say 2 of my favorites. One is when they set up the first motorcycle challenge to win the truck. He really does just fail 3 times in a row, and for just a second it leaves you guessing oh, then I guess that doesn't move forward the plot, and they do it so fast. And I do like the gag and an execution of it, of the 2 burly cops appearing and cornering Marge, and she's so scared, and then they instantly walk past her and just start hardcore making out and jump into a room for some privacy. Those ones both gave me really good laughs in the theater.
Yeah, there's lots of very good gags in the movie. One of my favorites is when they go to the gas station, they see the wanted poster of the family, so Bart draws on it, and there is a version of the family that looks like the doodle Bart drew over the existing photo. That's a very funny joke that I remembered to this day just from watching the movie originally. And I think broadly, we often in discussions of the show, we often take for granted the animation. The animation in this movie is very good. With the flourishes, they are often not allowed to do do on the TV show thanks to budget reasons and other reasons entirely. And this is the best the show would ever look in this period. And unfortunately, now they use a tool set to make the show that does not allow for this level of expressiveness with the characters. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have I guess something I liked about the movie in a moment, but the animation is obviously very crisp, and I agree with that. Will was making the point while we were watching that he found it, like if you watch this movie when you're in your kind of Simpsons phase and what you know is the show, you're like, wow, this is a movie. Look at the amazing production values. But I kind of didn't like it in the same way that later episodes, like I remember a particular one from season 20 that is it's kind of a mock episode of 24 or something like that. It looks super high tech compared to the original Simpsons. Like it's really crisp and three-dimensional, but it just strays so far away from the aesthetic that I'm familiar with. And this is like admittedly a very subjective kind of grievance, but that is kind of how I felt about it. I don't know. You have seen many more of the later episodes than I have. What do you think about that?
I honestly really miss the analog look of the show. We could never have that back.
Yeah.
It's very unrealistic to ever think that they could bring it back. They're just going to be digital only. They have been since like 2003. I think like internally the show has been reined in visually just to streamline the process and then ensure there are no mistakes overseas. So we often lose the individual takes by different directors. Like when we're watching the earlier shows, we can see like, oh, David Silverman did this scene, or this is a Jim Reardon scene. Like in the movie especially, we can see like very David Silverman drawings, which often get ironed out in the TV production process.
Yeah, I'm always going to miss the warmth of the cell animation. And one thing a lot in the research is that we've done for the show has revealed to me that like in like season 9 forward, they lost a lot of their best folks on the animation side. Like it's easy to focus on the writers, but they lose so much on the animation side. And this film brought back a lot of folks who had kind of left The Simpsons, like on the animation side, David Silverman, Rich Moore, Laura McMullen, just to name a few. And so I think they brought more artistic choices and stronger artistic vision to the show than it had had in the film that the show hadn't had in a while. But I think they were returning to a thing they'd left and seen like, oh, this is the way the railroad runs now, or this is where the track goes. And they're having to figure it out among digital skill tool sets they didn't have before. And it is crazy seeing this 07 thing now compared to a 2020 episode of Simpsons that is just so, it's so much more on digital tool sets and just controlled in a way that feels even more lifeless than digital did in 07. It's pretty crazy how the difference I could even just feel 13 years after the movie.
I guess my real wish is that this movie had come out 7 years earlier and it could have been almost exactly the same movie. And if I'd have seen it in the year 2000, it could have honestly been worse and I still would have just loved it. The idea of a Simpsons movie, by the time they actually did it, it sort of felt like the ideal moment for it had kind of passed. But there was something I really liked about this movie, and it actually has nothing to do with the movie, but Herman appears at one point. I'm actually forgetting
Herman's Military Antiques. Yeah, he's in I think one or two kind of crowd type scenes.
And I was remembering way back at the start of the episode, we were talking about the kind of early episode or early seasons, and I can't remember if it's season one or two where there's the episode. This was my favorite episode as a kid, and I think it speaks to how when you're really young, you don't fully get The Simpsons. But my favorite episode was the one where Bart is getting bullied by a character who, like, I guess it is Nelson Muntz, but Nelson isn't like fully formed as Nelson at this point. In the same way that Ralph Wiggum, takes a while to kind of go full Ralph. It's the episode where, Herman basically helps Bart start an army. And the way I received this at age, 6 or 7 was just like, wow, that would be so cool. I wish I had an army. And I'd completely forgotten about that episode until Herman appeared just now. And so it took me back to the age of like childish fantasies like that. Quite warmly, I should add.
Well, I like Herman because clearly they had high hopes for Herman because they included him in the opening credits. And so well into season, 20, he was still there along with Jacques in that opening credit scene of just failed season 1 characters who never went anywhere.
The joke in that episode where they're in the treehouse, I think, and Herman has a map and he says, the key to Springfield has always been Elm Street. The Babylonians knew it. The Greeks knew it. Now you knew it.
Yeah.
So good.
Mr. Herman?
Yes?
Did you lose your arm in the war?
My arm? Well, let me put it this way. Next time your teacher tells you to keep your arm inside the bus window, you do it.
Yes, sir. I will.
The episode's Bart the General. We actually just revisited that one. And the current character of Herman, we talked about Swartzwelder earlier, like he was the show's writer's way of mocking Swartzwelder too. Like they made him look kind of like him, and he's, a right-wing crank who loves a lot of Nazi memorabilia included, which they don't interrogate too closely. But he's like, I got some Nazi underpants, like he tries to sell Abe in one episode. Yeah, it's really weird when the one-armed character just shows up out in the middle of nowhere in an episode. Yeah.
As we're winding down, I just have a couple of stray thoughts about The Simpsons and why it was what it was to me as a child and why it is what it is now. I'm hardly the first person to observe that one of the reasons why the show doesn't really work anymore is because it's frozen in amber in 1989. Mm-hmm. The Simpsons is no longer the default American family. Springfield is no longer everybody's idea of an every town. But aside from that, when I was a kid, one of the things that was so exciting to me about The Simpsons is that it actually felt like a grown-up show. It didn't talk down. And like, say, the Looney Tunes, came from a very particular time and place and cultural sensibility. There seemed to be a unified, let's say, boomer or older Gen X voice behind it. And it had the texture of that and the cultural reference points of that. Just as the Looney Tunes would often have references to, I don't know what was big at that time, Al Jolson or whatever. The Simpsons had things like, say, in Mr. Plow, when Adam West is signing autographs at that car show. I mean, we all know who Adam West is, but that's a particularly kind of boomer conception of him. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, it's this thing that's frozen in amber in 1989, and yet all the cultural reference points are, well, like 10 years ago, that 24 episode.
Yeah.
Or now, when there's that clip circulating of AOC and the squad yelling at Donald Trump. Yeah, it's both stuck in time, and yet also it's lost all its texture.
They shouldn't be in America. No one but me in America. No taxes for me in America. This is my natural America.
We're more American than your wife.
She's not a big presence in my life.
Your love life makes us heave.
You two will never see Tel Aviv.
I mean, if I could diagnose that particular problem, I would say it's like the Lorne Michaelification of the show, of just like The Simpsons. Even in the classic era, they were always like, oh, let's promote this thing. Let's say we've got a big star on this. They definitely, it was about self-promotion and trying to get those headlines. But yeah, in the post 9/11 years of Simpsons, it felt so much more about that, of like, well, no, we definitely need to get Lady Gaga on here, and we need a scene where Lisa says, wow, Lady Gaga.
I was thinking of Lady Gaga
put it out there
during your sentence.
Yeah, so Quest for Relevance just feels like chasing a tail, really, instead of in the 90s. It felt like they were leading the way on like saying what things were at least like cool and relevant. And when they lost that, it feels almost like sweaty how much they try to get it back by having too many different, guests on. And I also think that like star fuckery is what kind of defangs them a bit too, because they're like, well, don't want to be too mean to person X. What if we want to have them on sometime?
What if we started this movie with Green Day for some reason?
Yeah. Or the beloved to Michael and us, Tom Hanks as well.
Yeah. And that's why I bring this up, I think, because I see that ironing away of the specific perspective and texture of the show in this movie. The way Green Day appears in this movie, it's not like the way Adam West appears in the Mr. Plow episode.
Yeah, they're heroes.
Yeah. No, they're just there to be themselves. Tom Hanks is there to be themselves, and it's lighter mockery. Like I think we got to that a bit. It really hit me when we got to the Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger episode.
Yeah.
Where you could definitely tell they were told where the line was of how you could make fun of them and the acceptable amount of safe mockery they would take on, While in that one, though, I think Ron Howard actually was much more game to at least be like, yeah, do whatever shit you want with me. I don't care. They could be meaner. I mean, Adam West they were happier to be meaner to him anyway. And they were just a bunch of dorks, especially the writer of that episode, Mr. Plow, John Vitti. He's called himself like the biggest Batman 1966 fan there ever was. So,
well, that's something I like about that particular episode and why I use that example, because it does seem to come with a lot of genuine affection for him and his place in the pop culture ecosystem. And yet it also has this kind of jaundiced, like former boomer kid who's now an adult and sees Adam West at a car show perspective.
Yeah. And I mean,
it's a very lived in perspective.
Now they're even just older people who all their heroes are dead pretty much. Like, so they can't, when they have on people younger than them, they don't come at it from a childhood wonder perspective. Like one of the last times they did that, it felt like when they had Stan Lee on, and like, it's really cute on the commentary with Stan Lee. They get him, and Al Jean is just like, he's asking him about like 60s Fantastic Four comics, and it's an endearing moment.
It's very sweet.
Yeah.
I did want to go back to the movie really quick before we go, because one thing, so I see this movie as just a big missed opportunity. Like there are so many opportunities they miss. What I do like is how they bring a lot of old writers in to write the movie, especially David Merkin. David Merkin is so important to what The Simpsons is. He was just an outsider brought in season 5, and he changed the show completely, made it faster, funnier, meaner. Two big omissions in this movie are Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, two of the most important architects of The Simpsons, and it feels wrong that they are not part of this movie. They are so protective of characters. Mm-hmm. They are so just deliberate and specific about jokes. I feel like they could have made this movie so much better and would have made smarter choices, but for whatever reason, they were not part of this, and I feel like that I missed it. I could tell from watching it, like they are not part of this movie.
Yeah, Bill and Josh, they're probably our favorite showrunners and writers for the show ever. And they were like the first Simpsons nerds hired to write for The Simpsons, but also just very smart, funny, empathetic writers who really could do a great silly episode about Homer doing a dumb adventure or Bart befriending his loser principal. Like it felt like, because they were there for the classic Armin Tamzarian episode, I feel like the show was punishing them by not inviting them to the party, and it still bugs me to this day that they weren't there. And also, like, they have some of the of posters on Twitter. They have some of the best politics of the Simpsons former writers on there too. Like they're both big Bernie boosters. Josh Weinstein even more so.
Yes, definitely.
So, and it's always funny to see them like engage with their more centrist Hollywood liberal buddies on Twitter from time to time. So it's, I think, a huge part of why the film didn't take chances they maybe would have, or have cared as much about history, was not having Bill and Josh in there to offer up suggestions.
Well, I think it's fitting that we kind of ended the discussion almost by accident, dishing about our favorite episodes and just things that we like about The Simpsons, because of course, in spite of everything we've said today that's critical of this movie, all of us absolutely love The Simpsons to death. your worst day thinking about and talking about The Simpsons is still a pretty good day. So I'm glad we were able to, finally do this with you guys. It was a fantastic discussion. We'd definitely love to have you back. Was there anything that you wanted to plug?
Oh, well, I mean, me and Bob, do the weekly Talking Simpsons podcast that everybody should check out the older episodes, like the ones we've did with both you guys separately. I think listeners this will really enjoy. Or also, we did the ones with the Chapo folks with Virgil and Matt and Amber. I think your listeners would really enjoy too. But and also, we talk about a bunch of different cartoons on What a Cartoon. So if you enjoy lots of animated series or old ones and wanted to go back through them, maybe just check out our library and see which ones are shows you remember liking and want to learn more about.
Yeah, and we have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. Right there, we have a lot of episodes that aren't on the free feed, including our mini-series. We've gone over episodes of The Critic, King of the Hill, Futurama. There's about 50 or 60 episodes of our mini-series today, and there'll be more coming in 2020.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to engage with my always online personality at Twitter, that's at HENEREYG.
And I am at Bob Servo, like Tom Servo.
Since we're doing plugs, I already plugged our show, but I'm at Luke W. Savage on Twitter.
I guess I'm Will Sloan, ESQ.
Will Sloan-esque. It's a word. Just say it out loud. That's how I've read it.
Well, it's Will Sloan Esquire. But the thing is, I want people to know how to spell it.
I've always thought of it as like Will Sloan-esque. I didn't realize that it was short for Esquire. I thought it was like the quality of being Will Sloan.
There'd be a U in there if it was Will Sloan-esque.
You're quite right. Anyway, got into all kinds of topics today. There you have it, folks. Talking Simpsons, Michael and us. The crossover finally happened. I hope we'll do it again.
Mm-hmm.
What's the appropriate way to say say
Every time we say goodbye.
They'd end with a song for sure.
Yeah.
But we know how you guys should close it out with your classic farewell.
Now watch this drive.
There you have it.
Woo!
The Batmobile. Adam West! Hey kids, Batman!
Dad, that's not the real Batman.
Of course I'm Batman. See, here's a picture of me with Robin.
Who the hell's Robin?
Oh, I guess you're only familiar with the new Batman movies. Michelle Pfeiffer. Ha. The only true Catwoman is Julie Newmar, Lee Merriweather, or Eartha Kitt. And I didn't need molded plastic to improve my physique. Pure West. And how come Batman doesn't dance anymore? Remember the Bat to see? Yo, hey, yeah.
Nice meeting you. Just keep moving. Don't make eye contact.
Grandma, can I have the chocolate chips?
This secret recipe moment made possible by Emory Heart and Vascular Center. When Grandma needed heart care, she came to Emory. The difference? Emory Healthcare performs more heart procedures annually than anyone else in Georgia, which means better outcomes for our patients. And we offer advanced and personalized treatments developed by our top specialists that others don't. Like Grandma knows, where you start your heart care matters. Smart Cookie. EmoryHealthcare.org/smartcookie.